Hello and welcome to Gun Theory. Today we're taking a look at Resident Evil 2. More specifically, we're taking a look at Leon's shotgun, the W-870. So in real life, this shotgun is very clearly modeled after the Remington 870 Police Magnum pump-action shotgun. And to judge the realism score for this shotgun, we'll be looking at three major categories. 1. Appearance. Does it look like its real-life counterpart? 2. Performance. Does it act and operate like the real 870? And 3. General circumstances. Does it make sense that it would appear in a police station in the mid-1990s? Let's jump right into appearance. At first glance, it appears to be a pump-action shotgun, which fares well because that's what the 870 is. So we'll notice that the forend is made of polymer. That's the part where you rest your offhand on the thing that you pump back and forth that makes it a pump-action shotgun. So the real Remington 870 Police Magnum comes in either a synthetic polymer stock and forend or in wood. And we'll see that wood a little bit later on. And we'll also notice that the front sight bead looks exactly as it should. It's on top of the rib, and those beads are not maybe the sights that you'd be used to seeing on rifles or handguns. It's made for shotguns. It's literally just a little round bead that's soldered on right at the front. Moving back on the shotgun, we can clearly see the bolt, and something that I didn't expect is that the extractor, that little piece that grabs onto the rim of the cartridge, it's there, and it looks like it's its own unique piece on the bolt. And the receiver pins that we can see just above the trigger guard on the receiver, there should only be 2 of those. The front one and the back one are placed very well, as you might expect on a real 870. But that middle one, that's not really there on the real one. We'll also notice a distinct lack of markings, right? Little stamped writing identifying serial number, the type of shotgun that it is. Now, this is most likely because to be able to use a specific model of firearm in a video game, you have to get permission from the manufacturer of that gun. And so that's very expensive. Most people will model it after the real life one, but they'll give it a slightly different name, and they'll remove any markings that are specifically unique to that gun to avoid getting in legal trouble. And so we can't really expect them, unless they got the rights to use a real Police Magnum in the game, for them to put Remington 870 Police Magnum on the side. So understandable on that one. And we'll also notice that there is no bolt release. Normally on all 870 shotguns, there's this little button, it's just in front of and just a little bit overlapping with the front of the trigger guard. Now that will allow you to unlock the bolt to move the forend rearwards if it is already cocked. So in shotguns that are pump action, the bolt must lock with the barrel so that when you shoot, it stays sealed up and it doesn't fly back and blow your face off. And so if you had loaded around into the chamber, if you didn't shoot but you really needed to unload that for some reason or check to see if it were loaded, you can't just open the forend. So you have to press a certain button or a lever to unlock the bolt to allow you to cycle that forend back. And we'll notice that there is a complete lack of that on this gun. Now, the reason for that could be that it is a pretty specific identifying characteristic of a Remington 870, so it could be more in line with that why they didn't put Remington 870 on the side of the gun, because most of the competitors to the Remington 870, they use a different style of bolt release, so it could have just been too specifically identifying to put on this gun. And the same is true for the crossbolt safety that we would expect on the rear of the trigger guard. So you push it through to one side, you can't pull the trigger, the gun won't shoot, but if you push it through to the other side, you're good to go. You can pull the trigger and it will fire. So that's gone as well. Now, you'll also notice that there is no stock on this shotgun in the first form that we see it. It's just a pistol grip, and that would normally ding them quite a few points, except something that we'll look at a little bit later in general circumstances. And for a little nitpick of mine that I'm not really going to take points off for, the lifter doesn't actually move, it stays static when the forend is pulled rearwards. Now in the game, if you're not looking at it in the model viewer, you're never going to know that that was a thing. So normally, that lifter, as you pull the forend back, the magazine will pop one of the shells out onto the lifter, and then about halfway back on the forend travel, that lifter moves up and allows the shell to be chambered into the chamber. And then it will move back down as the bolt comes forward to chamber that round. So that is quite nitpicky because it would be very costly, even taxing on your computer's resources, if they were to have that custom animation in there. So it's understandable, but it will have a slight effect. And as you play through this game, you can find a couple of upgrades for this shotgun, and we're going to take a look at those next. So the first one that you'll find is a barrel extension and a magazine tube extension. Most shotguns that will be sold to police are going to have either an 18 or a 20-inch barrel. And so that original barrel length is not particularly realistic and it will ding them points. But once we find the new barrel with the magazine tube extension, we'll see that it is closer to that 18-inch mark. And it also allows for extending the magazine tube to what you might expect from a full-length regular 870. And we'll also see that the furniture from the forend and then the third upgrade, the stock here, it's made out of wood. Now that's still realistic because it is offered in either polymer or wood in the Police Magnum model. Overall though, the appearance is really shaping up to be something awesome. Alright, now for the meat, the performance. So first, let's take a look at the recoil of this shotgun. So generally, 12 gauge has very high recoil. It's a very sharp, sometimes painful, depending on your posture, recoil impulse. And the loads that Leon would be using are what we normally refer to as high brass. So they're loaded with a lot more powder, they're a much hotter load. And what Leon would be using here is something like buckshot. My guess is something about double aught, if you're looking for a specific number. But with a lot of practice, you absolutely can get that recoil mitigation down. It's still not necessarily a pleasant thing to shoot with those kinds of loads, but you can get good at mitigating the recoil, and we can only assume that a police officer is going to have a decent amount of practice with this sort of gun. Alright, now for the spread. Generally speaking, in a 12 gauge shotgun, you can expect between about a ½ inch to 1 inch of spread per yard from the muzzle. Now the spread is affected by many things, but the barrel length is the most significant factor in determining how much spread a given shotgun is going to have. And we'll notice that we have a shorter barrel length in the original way we find the shotgun, and then we've got a longer barrel. So what we're going to do is we're going to expect that 1 inch per yard out of the shorter barrel, and then a little closer to that ½ inch per yard from the longer barrel. Believe it or not, the spread would usually be a little bit less than these numbers in a real 870 with these barrel lengths, but we're going to give them a little bit of leeway here. And another thing to note is that the absolute maximum range I found myself ever having a chance to shoot at with any gun in this game was about 15 yards, because we're mostly indoors. But the vast majority of the combat in this game, where you're shooting at zombies and other nasties, is about 7 yards or even closer. Like most of it's within 5, 6, 7 feet, not 7 yards. But that 7-yard mark is what we're going to use for demonstration here because we want to give them a little bit of leeway. So let's apply that little generalized spread rule to the gun in this game. So for the shorter barrel, we're going to expect something about that 1 inch per yard mark. So we should expect about a 7-inch spread at the absolute maximum out of the shorter barreled version. This is obviously not what we see in game. However, in game, it's much closer to like 2 feet, 24 inches of spread instead of something like 7 inches that we might expect. That's like 3 times, a little over 3 times what we would expect to see in a real Remington 870, even with a shorter barrel like this one. Alright, so one thing to ding the points, what about the longer barrel? How did the longer barrel do? Well, we're going with about a ½ inch per yard on the longer barrel, which would mean about 4.5 inches maximum of spread for all of those 8 or 9 buckshot pellets, which we still don't see. It seems to be closer to like 1 foot this time, right? 12 inches instead of the 4.5 that we might expect. But hey, they actually reduced the spread in accordance with the barrel length. That's freaking awesome. Most games won't even do that. So while it is on both cases about 3 times more than we might expect from a real 870 with a corresponding barrel length, at least they did something to make that spread a little bit more realistic. And I will note that most video game shotguns have like 80 inches of spread as soon as the shot leaves the barrel. That's obviously bogus. There's not a single shotgun in the world that you can make that happen with. I mean, that's just basic physics. Come on. So while it's about 3 times what you might expect on both cases, at least it's not 80 times what you might expect, right? So this is definitely going to take some points away. It's probably the biggest thing that we're going to take points away from this shotgun for. All right. So now let's take a look at the damage. This thing really messes up zombies bad. Would a real 870 cause that kind of gruesome damage to the human body? Well, not necessarily, right? Because if the spread were closer to what we might expect in real life, it would be almost like a singular slug hitting you in the chest rather than a spread, because the shot would probably still even be in the wad. But let's go with it. Let's say that the spread is in real life what it might be in the game. So it's more spread than we would really expect. Would it then cause such gruesome, just awful, nasty wounds? Sort of, yeah. Not quite as much. However, we also have to remember that these are zombies, which means their bodies are almost all decayed. Decaying flesh tends to soften up, become a little more fragile, and it's easier to remove that flesh from the bones. And so that can account for all the nasty, gruesome wounds that we're causing on these zombies. It's definitely exaggerated a little bit, but not as much as you might expect. But they really do cause gruesome wounds in real life. You definitely do not want to be hit with any kind of 12 gauge, like more than any other bullet that you could probably think of. One man in real life who accidentally shot himself in the leg with a 12 gauge shotgun that he had just purchased described what his leg looked like after he accidentally discharged the weapon into his leg as, quote, "a pile of Alpo dog food smushed up against what used to be just below my knee," unquote. Ugh, that's awful. That's gruesome, isn't it? So we can attribute all of that flesh being removed from the zombies when we hit them with this shotgun to their decaying bodies, as well as the fact that buckshot really does, if you hit with the right spread at the right angle, it really will do some really disgusting things that you definitely don't want to happen to you, so please be safe. All right, now for the real damage stat, rather than the damage that it causes to their flesh on their bodies. Does this shotgun take down zombies in about the amount of shots that we could expect in real life? Well, they're zombies, so we don't really have an accurate comparison for real life, but we can expect them to be moderately tougher than humans, owing to the fact that their brain is the only thing that really matters in removing them from this plane of existence. So, for it to usually be 1 shot to the head and 1 or 2 shots to the torso at these close ranges, that seems about what I might expect were zombies to suddenly appear in the real world. Maybe just a tiny bit weaker than maybe what I would expect. So the damage is quite realistic, I would say. All right, loading. So shells in a pump-action shotgun are loaded by pushing up the lifter that we mentioned earlier with the tip of the shell you're trying to load in and inserting it straight into that magazine tube, which is the tube just beneath the barrel. So in the shorter barrel and magazine version of the shotgun, Leon loads in 1 at a time with a maximum capacity of 4, which is realistic. The shorter your tube, the fewer shells you're going to hold, and about that length would be about what you'd expect to hold, maybe 3 or 4, maybe 5 shells. But then in the longer barrel and magazine, he actually loads 2 at a time, still for 4 motions of pushing shells in for a total of 8 rounds in that longer magazine tube, which the capacity, absolutely realistic. But is it realistic that he could be loading in 2 shells at a time? Now, I can tell you from personal experience that loading a shotgun is actually harder than you'd think. You fumble a lot, it takes a little bit more finger strength than you might be expecting to get that shell to really go in there. And so you end up dropping a lot of shells at first. It takes some practice. So to be able to load 2 at a time, is that realistic? Well, it's definitely going to take a whole lot of practice to be able to do that. But with that being said, competition shooters in the real world who compete with shotguns get very good at this, and many of them will modify the receiver of their shotgun so that they can actually load 4 or more shells in a single motion, just ramming them all up in there. It's crazy to see them do that. So, while difficult, we can definitely say that it is realistic that Leon has practiced loading shotguns before, with 2 shells at a time. He is a police officer after all. So overall, I would say that they got performance pretty good. Not perfect, but better than most video games, particularly considering that the spread was the point that we maybe didn't like so much about it, but at least they did something. Instead of most games saying, yeah, it'll come out of the barrel in like 80 inches of spread already. Alright, now for the general circumstances surrounding the use of this shotgun. Does it make sense that a Remington 870 Police Magnum would be in an American police station in about the mid-1990s? Well, if you've ever seen a shotgun in a police car since about 1950, you saw a Remington 870 Police Magnum, precisely the shotgun that Leon has in this game. And in the description for this gun, it actually kind of says one of the big reasons that this shotgun has been used so prominently by American police. Their receivers are made of all steel. They are very robust shotguns. They can take a really severe beating and just keep on functioning. Many of the competing designs on the market have used aluminum receivers, and some of them even have plastic trigger guards that can be damaged very easily and take the gun out of action, turn it into a big steel paperweight or a big aluminum paperweight. And the 870s really stand the test of time. You can be confident that if you were to buy a Remington 870 that was made in 1950, it's gonna be just as good as one that was manufactured last year in 2018. So I think that they got this literally perfect. They could not have chosen a better pump action shotgun for this game. Alright, what about the ammunition? Is it chambered for the right ammo? Because a lot of games will chamber them in really weird cartridges that never were used in that given gun in the real world. Well, as we look at the box here, the box doesn't necessarily say 12 gauge on it, but it has a lot of other markings and words that you might actually see in real life were you to go to a store and look at shotgun shells. For example, shot shells. That's technically speaking the correct word for shotgun shells, because it is a type of shell that contains shot, which is the generalized word for little lead pellets of any size. But we'll see in the description as well, it says 12 gauge shotgun shells, and they even tell us the diameter of the shell, 18.1 millimeters. Alright, and lastly, that lack of a stock on the original form that you find this shotgun. So police departments aren't beholden to strict regulation usually as far as the configuration of their shotguns. This means that you can see a lot of variance in the furniture on a given shotgun in police service, though we can say with a high degree of certainty that no police station uses a shotgun without a shoulder stock of some kind. So some police shotguns will have flashlights attached to the fore end, some of them will have a pistol grip and a collapsible polymer stock, others will just have a regular wooden style of shoulder stock that you might expect to see on any rifle since the dawn of firearms. So the lack of a stock, right, that would normally ding the score quite a bit. That's a really big part of a shotgun. Except one thing. Stamped metal stocks that fold up over or under the gun were popular there for a while. They still are on some guns. So this one was locked away in the armory instead of being in a police cruiser like we probably would expect it to be. So why was it in there? What if they had a stamped metal stock and perhaps it broke, or they were just trying to replace it with some new stock that they wanted to use on their shotguns, and that's why it was locked away in the armory? So they got away just by the skin of their teeth on losing points for that stock. But we're not going to count off for that, because it is possible. Alright, time for our final thoughts. Overall, there's really only one major complaint with a couple of little ones. The major complaint being the spread of the W-870. But at the same time, they did go to the trouble of decreasing spread proportionally with the increase in barrel length. So, having said all of that, I'd give the Remington 870 Police Magnum or the W-870 a realism score of 95%. Great job, Capcom. A survival horror video game is the last place that I'd expect to see a gun depicted so well. Let's hope the rest of the guns in this game can fare so well. But I hope you learned something. If you like this sort of content, please like, subscribe, and maybe even consider becoming a patron of this channel on Patreon. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.